Hello, welcome to a new episode of The Artist Show. I'm your host, Z. Today is going to be about the Mixerbrush. A lot of people know about it, but they're not exactly sure how it works. So I'm going to show you how I use it, which is to create some really interesting, textury, painterly brushstrokes with the Mixerbrush. This would benefit you the most, I think, if you already have a pretty good understanding of Photoshop and maybe some fundamentals of art like value control, light and form, and color theory. Alright, so without further spaghetti, here we go. There's a few things that's really interesting about it that makes it different from a normal brush. And I think the number one thing is if you have a normal brush, then whatever color you have picked, like say I picked this kind of purplish bluish area, I just picked something, then your whole brush is going to be painting that color, right? Like every part of this brush paints the same color. And I can't just say pick up this area and make that my brush. No, it just takes one color. So if I hop over here to Mixerbrush, I have it on a hotkey, so I don't have to click it at the time. What I can do is, if I like this area of color, I can sample it. And you can see the color here, it tells me I still have this selected, but that's wrong because this is the real color that picks that the Mixerbrush is using on the bottom left. This thumbnail tells you what colors are on the bristles. So when I paint with this brush, you can see every bristle paints the color that it picked up earlier from the canvas, from wherever I clicked on with Alt on the canvas, and it just ignores what color you have on the normal brush. So if I go back to the normal brush now, it's still got this color, whatever it is picked up, but the Mixerbrush has got its own little coloring here on the bristles. And that's pretty much the big trick of it is Mixerbrush lets you, if you combine Mixerbrush with one setting or one type of brush in Photoshop, which is bristle brushes, you know you have a bristle brush if you go to the brush panel here, and on the very first screen it'll say bristle qualities. And this is like Photoshop's way of simulating brush with hairs, like individual hair strands. So if I turn off this weird setting, you can see that Photoshop actually is painting. It's like you're having a bunch of brushes. Like this one has got one, two, you can count how many. This one has got like 10 bristles. So when I paint with this, Photoshop is basically using 10 brushes at the same time. And each one, you can get a different color on at the end of each bristle by sampling from some area of multiple colors with the Mixerbrush. And that's kind of the trick of it. If you always paint with this kind of brush, what happens is you can, like, say, if you look at this painting I have, every area is filled with lots of colors. So this skin, especially in the shadow, this skin area has got you can see blue and reddish, orange, and a bit of green, bit of purple, and it's all in here, but it's mostly this reddish purplish color. So from afar you get the visual impression that it's skin, which is warm red, and it's in shadow, which is cool shadow. So you get this final result, but it has lots of interesting textures inside for your eyes to enjoy, because I think eyes like to see the subtle shifts of color. And the same thing with like these areas down here, where you can see the skin has got blue and red and orange and green and everything inside. The overall effect is they look kind of skinish, like yellowish oranges from afar, but it's just more interesting than if you say pick a normal brush and have your typical, like, you know, like your mid-tone and then your highlight, and then you have your shadow color. It's not as visually like interesting. The surface is not so interesting as if you did it with Mixerbrush. And so the Mixerbrush, what you have to do is to get it to work like this. It's not, you have to tweak some settings. I think the most dramatic one that has an effect on how this looks is the wetness setting. So I think the best way to do it is to just pick a mixer brush, pick a default Photoshop preset, and then just play around with it. And how I do it is just, you know, take any color and paint some on the canvas, and just get a really obvious setup. Like I got three. This is not obvious enough. So I got three separate colors here. So then I'll use a kind of brush, any mixer brush, and sample this and see what it does to it when I paint. So you can see with some settings it's going to not maintain the sharpness. It'll soften it a little bit. Especially if you go make it wet, it will really be faint. Like it's similar to if your brush had medium. Like if your oil brush was a bit oily, it's got medium on it, which is diluting the paint and mixing it together. So it's taking this nice and sharp colors. Like if you imagine these are three paint blobs you put on the canvas or on your brush, and it's just diffusing them like this. Whereas if you have a brush that's really hard and dry, and you sample it, then you can maintain this very sharp division between the colors. So they're good for different purposes. Like this may be good for something that's supposed to be hard, like in the foreground, or something that's rocky or metallic or something. So these settings are pretty important to play with to understand what they're doing. The different levels of flow, for example, also affects how intense the colors, or how solid the color looks, how opaque it looks. With the low flow, it's going to look like you don't have so much. You didn't dab very hard on your paint. You only picked up a little bit, and you're maybe touching the canvas lightly with your brush tip. With a heavy flow, it's like you're really jamming your brush into the paint and picking up loads of it, and then just like really, like, you know, grinding it against the canvas and getting it all up there. So it's going to have this sharp look to it. And then things, I'm not so sure what the difference between load and oh yeah, okay, now I remember. Load is how much the amount of paint you have before it runs out. So if you just like load your brush a tiny bit with a dab of paint and you do a brush, then you have no more paint left, and it starts to fade like this, like the paint is running out from you dabbing like on the canvas. But if you have a heavy load, then it will run out later, so you can see the stroke gets longer. So you can simulate like a really dry brush effect where the paint runs out. And this will be very interesting if you have your layering brushes on top of each other, your strokes, and they have different colors, and they will start to interact like this, which I'll try to show something about that later. If you have 100% load, then the paint never runs out, and it just keeps going and going and going. I guess the last thing here you can see is mix is blanked out. That's because it's completely dry, so a dry paint doesn't mix at all. I'm going to get some different colors around here so we can see maybe some mixing effect. So I'll put colors that we don't have already over here on this area, and then I'll turn on a little bit of wetness so the mix gets turned on. So if we have like a little bit of mix going on, and we take a foreign color like this and we put it over here, it's going to blend the colors together. So you see this green is blending, all the colors are blending, so they're not their former like true selves. They don't look like themselves. They look like some mixture of what new color you're putting down and what old color is already on there. And this is a nice way to paint shifting colors, because you're, depending on how hard you press, it's mixing different amounts. So if I press really hard, then it's going to give me mostly the new color. If I just brush lightly, then it's going to maintain mostly the old color. So you can see this shifting effect. And you can control how much it mixes. If you have 100% mix, then this becomes just a smudge brush. Like all it does is it moves paint around that's already on the canvas. You're not adding anything new anymore. This is also very useful if you want to just play around with the edges of your painting. Like if you did already have a painting like this, for example, and you like everything, but you want some edges to be softer than others, and you don't want to really affect the color themselves, you can use this. Any pink mixer brush, any of them with mix 100% will just mess with the paint on the board. It doesn't add anything new. So that's the 4 settings. For me personally, I don't like it when Photoshop mixes colors for me, because it has this kind of airbrush digital gradient look to it, that it looks like a computer is calculating and smoothing out everything, and it just doesn't look nice. I like a bit of grit, you know, so that's why I don't use it. I always have wetness to 0, and I play with the amount of flow to dictate how much the colors mix. So with there's no mixing now, but with a low flow, I can just lay down a little bit of paint so it doesn't mix completely. With a high flow, then it just covers everything up completely. Like I'm just squeezing like a new tube of paint right over top of it, and it gets covers up the bottom. Okay, so that's kind of how mixer brushes function. But how you use it is a whole other matter, you know. So because they're so nice at picking up different multiple colors on one brush tip, I always like to whatever image I'm painting on, I like to have another canvas open, and here I want to create some effects that are or some combinations of colors that look nice. So like if I'm painting some kind of I don't know, wood, but I wanted to have this green mineral looking tints inside. Here is very, now it's a good point I think to look at some like classical artists that do this kind of thing, or even new artists. So this one guy I really like to look at is Steven Assail. He's like this contemporary painter who does kind of realism similar to some old masters, but he pushes it a little bit. So things like this, where in a small area he's got lots of color variations. Like you can look at just this tiny area, there's some red and there's some yellow, there's a patch of green here, there's a bit bluish here, and there's some like glazing of white and yellow on top to assimilate the depths of skin, and he does this a lot. And from afar it gives you this effect that the surface is very varied, and that's somehow like you'd think that it's weird that you put so many colors together that are contrasting, but actually I think it's more realistic this way, because our eyes do have produced this kind of tiny variations of color everywhere, like noise. If you close your eyes, you see this dancing noise, and we're projecting this noise everywhere when we're looking at the real world. So I think it actually lends to realism to have these like very, very contrasting colors that are shifting in very small areas. But from afar, you want it to look like the color that the thing is. So the skin is always going to be kind of pinkish, orangish from afar, even if they do have greens and blues and purple and everything when you look up close. And so to do that, with a mixer brush, you have this overall balance that you keep in mind by looking at when you make this color patch, you look at it from afar to see what the overall effect is, and then you go in and you do some of this like tiny stroke shenanigans, you know, like color variations. So maybe I should use a different brush for this. So I'm just gonna randomly like put some like say quote unquote wrong colors in here that are not part of the original like base color, which is yellow. And maybe yellow is my goal for this. I want finally in the end this surface to look yellowish, but now I'm adding variations of color, like small strokes inside, like this, and I just get like almost every color in there, you know. But all I want to do is make sure that yellow is dominant at the end, so that from afar it looks basically like a yellow patch of color. Let's say like this, right? It's not a really pretty example. Now I can use a mixer brush and I can sample this. Now you can check here on this little square that it's got sampled. Now the brush is gonna paint just this. So now if I go over here and say I want to paint some area, then when I do a stroke, especially one that has high flow, which means it really maintains the original sharpness of this area, then it's gonna look very complex. Every brush it basically looks yellow still from afar, especially at thumbnail size. It looks like yellow, but you can see that there's interesting stuff happening inside of it, and that's partly is from this the amount of colors and stuff variations I put inside of this blotch here, which I can come back to anytime to pick up again. The thing with Mixerbrush is you can pick up any color on the canvas anywhere, and it'll maintain this color. But if you pick a color on your color swatch or your color wheel or whatever, like traditional way, not the alt pickup way, then it's going to replace the whole brush with just a basic color. So now it's acting like a normal brush again. So that's why I have this separate canvas where I just want to be able to come back and pick up on this texture I already spent a lot of time making. So you can have something here that's like soft and blendy. You can have something that's like hard and let's say noodly. If you can push things around like in different ways. So if I do this kind of noodling motion with the brush, and then I pick up on it and then noodle more and then noodle more, it's going to get, this paint is going to get really mixed and it's going to have lots of complexity. And in the end, if I say I was painting a purple dress and I want this one area to be a kind of interesting, complicated purple or pink, you know, I just take this, which is already mostly pink, then I can dab some paint on top of it. And then I just pick this and paint on my actual painting where I need this color. And it's going to give me this interesting like texture to it that will take forever to do with a normal brush. And another cool trick about this is it's maybe easier to get an interesting texture on the brush, but it's harder to control also control the darkness of it at the same time as you're putting down the brush. So I don't do that. So in the first pass, I just try to get the surface to look interesting, to have a variety of colors. And I always make sure I paint a new area on a separate layer. And once I do that, I have this variation here and I like it, I can then lock this layer and then play inside of this with a different brush that maybe shifts the darkness of it. So now I can say tone down this bottom part to make it look like it's maybe falling off in the lights. You know, it's going to shadow, for example. So you can work on top of this then without totally destroying noise that you built up earlier with the brush strokes. So it's still there, but now you can also get the correct kind of light you want in there. You can also use gradients and other tools now inside here. You can also adjust it. You can do whatever you want, but as long as you don't completely cover up what the original brush strokes, you're going to be able to hold on to that visual interest that you build up with the Mixerbrush. So then the whole painting is made up of a new layer and then new brush stroke, and then play around with the brush stroke after you lock the layer down. And then you can even one last step I like to do is to mess up the edges. If the paint brush is too sharp all over, or it has just really similar kind of edge everywhere, like it's all hard or all soft, then at the end I can take a eraser or a smudge tool, and I can like just say soften some of these edges so that it's got a variety of edges also. So this one brush stroke is gonna have sharp edge over here and then a soft edge over here, and like one that's completely lost over here. Maybe that needs the eraser. And then that's how I got really interesting and just kind of noisy surface effects all over the image. Like it's nowhere is completely empty. Even if it looks empty, you can pick up on tiny stuff in there. So it's always interesting to look at it everywhere. Let's see. Oh, the last thing is so I have these mixer brushes saved in order of hardness and softness. So as you can see the name here, some are good for soft, like blendy or airy stuff, and then some are good for this like super harsh, distinct stuff, and then stuff in between. And each one I give a different texture. And I downloaded these high-res canvas textures from the internet, and I gave kind of each brush a different canvas texture, so that you can see here when I'm painting with this, that this kind of scratchiness is from the canvas setting, so it's from the texture setting. So when you turn on texture and you select a file in here that's a canvas, and you play with the settings so that this texture shows up when I don't press very hard, and I can choose to cover it up later, like this, if I want to make that area look like it's got lots of paint on top of it. Then the different canvases you have in different brushes will also interact together and give you a variety of canvasness to your painting. So it's just one more layer of noise that you can have, one more layer of interest and contrast. That's also why I'm so excited about the mixer brush, is because the way it works, it allows for so much accidents to happen. It really, like, it creates so much randomness that it allows you to see things that are not there. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention actually is one way to get this ultra dense detail thing happening is if I go into brush dynamics, right? Actually, so you have to make sure you're using a bristle brush. But if you're using one, you can go in angle jitter, which is in brush dynamics, and if you set this angle control to pin pressure, what happens is the brush will twist itself when you press harder or softer. And since you can't, it's basically not possible for someone to maintain such precise pressure, the brush is always going to be shifting and twisting a little bit. And then you get free noise just from painting strokes. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Although if you want to have this orderly effect, like if you want your surface to look neat and structured, like this, where you want to shade your object according to the surface of it, then you can turn it off and then do your orderly clean strokes. So either way works really nice. Oh yeah, and one last thing. So another thing is, when you're using the mixer brush, just like with any other brush, you can sample either one layer or all the layers. So if I make a blank now and put some colors in here, just randomly, let's say I got this going on and I have this background stuff, that's this noise here. If I want to paint a new layer and I just want what stuff I'm working on this layer, which is this, then I need to turn off sample all layers to get that. If sample all layers is on, then you're picking up everything, which even includes the white like space and blank areas and everything, all the layers. So if you want that, then keep it on. Otherwise, turn it off. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe to my YouTube, or you can find me on my Facebook or my website here. It's all up here. So cheers and keep arting.